Welcome everyone to the seminar series of Working Group on Theory in the Post-Action of K-Peritia. Blazej, Kaucz, and I are thrilled to have you here today.
That's right, Dina. In the Working Group 1 Theory, we are so excited to share our journey from the past year with you all.
Absolutely. This seminar series has been a catalyst for shaping the theoretical structure of cultural expertise. It's been an incredible process, and we are proud of the progress we've made so far.
Our main goal as a working group is to map out existing theoretical frameworks regarding cultural expertise as a concept. At the same time, we aim to highlight some critical gaps in unexplored and under-researched areas.
Exactly. And today's seminar is particularly special. It's being led by none other than the chair of the action, Professor Livia Holden.
Professor Holden's presentation serves as a cornerstone for our theoretical discussions. It's a fantastic opportunity to delve deeper into the significance of cultural expertise as a concept and to understand its role as an interdisciplinary umbrella framework.
What's so truly fascinating is how the seminar highlights the main characteristics of the theoretical pursuit and encourages fresh perspectives in this emerging field.
We are so eager for you to engage with today's session and gain insights from Professor Holden's expertise. With that, we'll leave you to enjoy her seminar on the topic.
Thank you all for being here, and we hope you find this seminar as enriching and thought-provoking as we do. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and many thanks for your presence today. This seminar will focus on the theory that have led to the formulation of the concept and the ethics of cultural expertise and the positioning of cultural experts. This seminar is part of the K-Peritia Action 2201, funded by Kaucz, European Cooperation in Science and Technology, and by the European Union, and hosted at the Royal Anthropological Institute of the United Kingdom and Ireland. As chair of K-Peritia, I thank our funders and the host institution, and for this particular event, I thank Anna Oliveira and Dina Hadad, who are the leaders of the working group theory of K-Peritia and the convener of this seminar series. So today we will talk about the theoretical framework of cultural expertise from its start, the definition of cultural expertise and the connected concept of cultural expertise. Cultural expertise proposes itself as an umbrella concept which connects with more concepts that are nevertheless distinct from one another. And then the link between cultural expertise and international human rights, the ethics of cultural expertise, selected data from the UK, France, and Italy to have just a small overview of how cultural expertise configures in specific settings, cultural expertise applications through the questions that are the most frequently asked to the expert, the impact of cultural expertise, and then we will conclude with an overview of the main sources on cultural expertise and also of the social media and working platform on cultural expertise. I will start this seminar with a positioning exercise. The genesis of the concept of cultural expertise started from an early exposure to the practice of anthropologists acting as experts, and then consolidated with EuroExpert and Caltex, the two projects funded by the European Research Council, and which are the antecedent of K-Peritia, which is funded by Kaucz. The idea of cultural expertise started with a preliminary reflection in the 90s when I was doing my PhD at SOAS, and I had the privilege to observe the working of a sector of the university as enterprise, in which social scientists were contracted as country experts, mainly for migration proceedings, but also for criminal cases. And later, in the early 2000s, I came to know about the experiences of Canadian and Australian anthropologists in particular, who acted as experts in First Nation treaties and native land titles. And I found interesting at that time that the skills of anthropologists acting as expert witnesses in migration and criminal law, and the one acting as expert witnesses for matters related with autochthon minority, First Nation, and Aborigines were not connected in any way from an academic perspective. And to many extent, this separation remains now. Actually, I argue that this is there is a theoretical reason for a certain distinction, which we will see later in this presentation. But from a theoretical and encompassing theoretical perspective, there is also reason to connect the two types of expertise. In 2007, I was myself appointed as an expert for a citizenship case in the United States. And since then, I have been regularly appointed as expert in the UK, the US, and the Netherlands for matters involving laws and culture connected with South Asia. And as an academic, I also had the privilege to work in South Asia, Australia, briefly in the United States, and in several countries of Europe. And the network of experts with whom I had the fortune to interact has therefore expanded and progressively included the geographic area that you see on this map. Eventually, during the preliminary research that I carried out to prepare the research design for EuroExpert, I formulated its main question, which became later also the title of the project, Cultural Expertise in Europe, What is it useful for? In fact, within the specialized network of experts with whom I was interacting, there was a general awareness of the existence of various types of engagement of anthropologists with law, but from our individual position, we could not really appreciate the impact that this engagement had on a system from a systematical perspective, and specifically the impact that this engagement had on law courts and on the beneficiary of cultural expertise. However, before delving into the discussion of impact, I think it is important to offer a comprehensive understanding of cultural expertise. Cultural expertise finds its theoretical foundation in the works of a number of authors spanning various branches and trends within the realm of social sciences. And this encompasses the specialized scholarship dedicated to exploring the diverse ways in which social scientists engage with the field of law. Although the theoretical evolution of cultural expertise has not unfolded in a linear fashion, arranging it in this sequential manner, as in this slide, is intended to facilitate the identification of these dynamic trends encompassing anti-colonialism, legal pluralism, multiculturalism, interculturalism, new legal pluralism, critical studies, as including gender studies and indigenous rights studies, and most recently, decolonial approaches. So the early and otherwise also called anti-colonial approach started in the French-speaking intellectual environment with Louis Mars and Frantz Fanon. Louis Mars grappled with the inadequacy of the French health system in Haiti, which confused mental illnesses and possession. And both Fanon and Mars subscribed to a humanistic approach which reclaims the dignity of the oppressed and the need to recognize culture as an identifying factor of identity for positioning against the systemic discrimination of European colonizer. Fanon in particular, denounces the European insistence in identifying the colonized as racialized other, against whom white supremacists affirm their supposed superiority. And this early anti-colonialism has inspired then later the ethnopsychiatry and the instrument of cultural intermediation in the 80s in France. The legal pluralism of the 60s introduced new nuances for that time to the conventional discourse about the sources of law, because it identified a sort of plurality of the sources of law. However, the limitation of the early legal pluralism was that the plurality was interpreted in a kind of binary opposition between state law and non-state law. And non-state law was also called at that time customary law, in which the law of the colonized would be incorrectly labeled as customary law. Nevertheless, the greatest achievement of the early legal pluralism was indeed to recognize the existence of sources of law outside the dominant legal system. In the later part of the 90s, the trend of multiculturalism emphasized ethnic and cultural affiliations in establishing a framework for identifying the set of duties and obligations individuals were expected to adhere to. And we have, for example, Strickbosch in 1991, who pointed to the potential conflict between the principle of the majority and the principle of minority groups. Van Breuk, 2001, defined culturally motivated crimes as acts committed by a member of minority groups or culture which are considered an offense by the legal system of the dominant culture, but are approved or even endorsed by the minority group. In this same trend of thought positions the early notion of cultural defense, which was developed in the context of First Nation and minority claims in America. Initially, cultural defense was conceived as the use of cultural argument for the purpose of the mitigation of the sentence in criminal cases. However, very soon, the limitation of multiculturalist approach appeared in the danger of essentialization of culture and the ghettoization of minority groups. And the trend of interculturalism argued that cross-cultural dialogue was deemed as necessary, with institutions that should make place also to contestation. And so the new cultural defense was reformulated as information provided to the courts on cultural background of people and facts in criminal law. And the notion of intercultural mediation was developed as a set of skills that were called cultural competence. Similar to interculturalism, the new legal pluralism has overcome the dualism between state law and non-state law for grasping what have also been called dispersed legality or interlegalities. And the notion of culture itself has come under scrutiny as potential risk to label and undermine certain social groups. So critical studies on law and culture argued against cultural determinism, cultural stereotypes, and abuses against indigenous groups, to say that socioeconomic, institutional, and biological process all concur to explain social practices and the way people behave. And this has helped to strengthen the ethics of cultural expertise and the positionality of experts. The decolonial approaches have also helped the articulation of cultural expertise for what concerns the push toward measure of inclusion, redress of inequality, the primacy of the voice of the beneficiaries of cultural expertise for the claim of rights. And so we have these three related concepts: cultural competence, cultural mediation, and cultural defense, which are concepts that are related with cultural expertise, which is proposed as umbrella concept, as encompassing these three concepts, but also all these three concepts remain distinct. In the 60s, cultural competence and cultural mediation developed as sets of skills that help the cross-linking of the cultural and social sphere with the aim to improve access to public life. And both cultural competence and cultural mediation revolve around a range of cognitive, affective, behavioral, and linguistic skills that have been identified as promoting a better communication in multicultural settings. And then we have cultural mediation, which has specialized mainly in the domain of the resolution of disputes. And in the United Nations, cultural competence has evolved mainly in the field of healthcare and more in general in the context of service provisions, more in a more extended domain. The early notion of cultural defense has been developed in the context of First Nations and minority claims in America and was conceived as the use of cultural argument for the purpose of mitigation of the sentence in criminal cases. And here we have the two definitions, cultural expertise and indigenous expertise, two main definitions that were developed to encompass the engagement of social scientists with law, their requisite, their limitation, ethical commitment, and their deontological position. Cultural expertise as a general definition and umbrella concept, and indigenous expertise as the expertise of the indigenous people and First Nations. So according to the general definition, cultural expertise is the special knowledge deployed by the experts of law and culture for assisting decision-making authority in the assessment of evidence with information on the social legal background of facts and person involved. Cultural experts must be independent and afford a position of critical affirmation for according a primary role to the voice of beneficiaries of cultural expertise. Indigenous expertise is the special knowledge and experience of indigenous people which locates and describes relevant facts considering their particular history, background, and context, and facilitates the explanation of indigenous concepts to a non-indigenous audience. Both definitions of cultural expertise affirm the primacy of the voice of the beneficiaries of cultural expertise. But there is a main difference between the two, and this is the role of the voice of beneficiary of cultural expertise. According to the general concept of cultural expertise, the primacy of the voice of the beneficiaries can be mediated by the state as it happens for all citizens. In the case of indigenous expertise, the stress is put on the indigenous voice as expression of self-determination. And this connects directly with the type of evidence that can be incorporated into legal proceedings, which for indigenous matters needs to respect the right to self-determination and the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. And as a result, the stress on the beneficiary is ensured in both definitions, but in different way. In the first definition, by the independence of the experts in the general theoretical framework of cultural expertise, and in the identification of the modality of self-determination and consent for indigenous expertise instead. So the question that we should ask ourselves is, of course, what is culture? And this is by no means the venue for any in-depth treatment of the notion of culture, but I will very briefly survey the definition of culture by four well-known anthropologists. We have Levi-Strauss in the 70s, according to whom any culture can be considered a set of symbolic system with language, matrimonial rules, economic relationship, art, science, and religion being foremost among them. All these systems aim to express certain aspects of physical and social reality, and even more so the relationship that these two types of reality have with each other and that the symbolic system themselves maintain with each other. According to Geertz in 1973, culture is not so much a set of customs and institutions as it is interpretations that the members of the society give to their experience, constructions they build on top of the elements they live through. It is not just about understanding how people behave, but how they perceive themselves, things. And then we have the anthropologists mainly, but also political scientists who are critical of the notion of culture. We have Cooper, Pillay, Breidenbach, Univikan. For these researchers, mainly from anthropology, but also for political sciences, the concept of culture would primarily be a tool that has replaced the concept of race, reproducing a number of essentially stereotypes. And in the French-speaking world, we have Wagner, who aligns with this trend in 2015 with a work entitled L'échec culturel, cultural failure. According to Pierre Bourdieu, culture refers only to the existence of a dominant and legitimized culture, antagonistic to a dominated culture whose values are not recognized. So how do we position in this very varied landscape? For the purpose of cultural expertise, culture is defined by what social actors in legal proceedings or dispute resolution deem as culturally relevant. So from a very pragmatic perspective. And what is important for us, always in the domain of the legal proceeding, is that cultural expertise is and remains closely connected with the Universal Declaration of Cultural Diversity, the European Court of Human Rights recognition of the protection of cultural diversity, and the protection of fundamental human rights such as freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of non-refoulement, freedom of movement, rights to belong, right to self-government, which are guaranteed by the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, according to a formalist approach to law which favors the black letter law, the written law, an inherent contradiction may be found between the principle of equal treatment and the protection of cultural rights. The formalist reading of equal treatment may also lead to a similar contradiction with any consideration about race, which may be better formulated as perceived race, ethnicity, and belong, which not only are concepts that exceed the legal field, properly speaking, but have also been widely recognized as lacking any biological foundation. Yet, this apparent contradiction is also dissolved, in my view, by the increasing awareness that formal equality often dissimulates substantial discrimination and the perpetuation of inequalities that are inherent to all institutions of society. And the social sciences have highlighted the need to understand that race, gender, and ethnicity, together with other variables such as age, class, education, religion, financial means, and more, all contribute to social inclusion and social exclusion. If we see it that way, there is no real contradiction between the principle of equal treatment and the legal provisions that require the consideration of concepts such as perceived race, ethnicity, and belonging to a specific social group in certain contexts and circumstances. It is very important for the concept of cultural expertise to also position vis-a-vis the ethics of anthropology. Anthropology has developed a strong ethical framework which is regulated by professional association mainly, and the engagement of anthropologists with applied anthropologists has generated, nevertheless, two main approaches on the unethical alliances of anthropology. The close relationship between British anthropology and colonialism, and the unethical co-optation of American anthropologists into counterinsurgency programs in Latin America and Southeast Asia. And this has generated a widespread lack of credibility of anthropology. Critics who have deconstructed the role of anthropologists as experts in general have gone as far as to suggest the inadequacy of anthropology vis-a-vis other disciplines, and also appear to have generated a general disregard for applied anthropology. Nevertheless, almost all anthropological associations have reaffirmed the general do not harm principle and have positioned it firmly against colonization and against co-optation. I argue that we need a strengthened ethical framework for cultural expertise. Specialized scholarship on expert witnessing, and I refer to Clifford Good, David Trigger, Lawrence Rosen, all have focused on what may be called as the deontology of expert witnessing, both the procedural requisite of expert witnessing and their limitation for an effective use of anthropological knowledge. And among the anthropologists who have argued for the engagement with law, we have two main positions. We have the position that I call the canonical position, which has been taken by Anthony Good, David Trigger, is that there is no place for advocacy in court. And on the other hand, the critical positions of the ones who have argued that there is a need to deploy anthropological methods to redress the structural power imbalance inherent to the legal system. And so we have in different ways John Campbell, the engaged Scandinavian anthropology, and the super diversity British scholarship that has gravitated around SOAS. The first position, the canonical position, is certainly the more secure, but less powerful because the voice of the expert are more easily overcome by the legal system. The second position can be more powerful, but certainly also less secure because if the experts are identified as being partial, their evidence is easily disqualified in court. And I suggest that a combination of the two approaches can be achieved with the ethics of cultural expertise proposed as a new conceptual framework that fine-tunes anthropological positionality as procedural neutrality with a potential shift toward critical affirmation. These new conceptual tools may provide the answer to the criticism historically affecting anthropology and the engagement of anthropologists with law. I suggest that anthropologists can become agents of resistance if we are able to adopt a stance which abides by the law, yet is independent enough to work with the legal professions without being co-opted by the judiciary or the government. And I propose the position of critical affirmation in which procedural neutrality in the context of cultural expertise in court refers to the capacity of anthropologists to carve out a place for themselves in the legal process, including also the claims for indigenous expertise and the denunciation of structural inequalities. So let's go back to my initial question, cultural expertise, what is useful for? I will now present very briefly extracts from the data sets on the UK, France, and Italy collected by Bridget Prince, Sarah Grew, Christian Bernier, Valeria Verdolini, Anna Ziliotto, and Tommaso Sbriccoli. The visualizations were made by Marius Holden. The respondents included judges, lawyers, experts, and the beneficiary of cultural expertise, and a total of 3,500 were asked if they thought that cultural expertise is useful. This question was part of the 20-minute questionnaire distributed by data collector in 16 European countries. Data collectors who speak the language and are familiar with the legal system of the respondents. And their work has been also to bridge the definition of cultural expertise into the set of social legal references of the respondents. So the sample was representative of the various levels of seniority, geographic areas, fields of law, and country population size. And the result of these questionnaires have been analyzed in function of the size of the sample to make it comparable. As you see, France positioned first for the appreciation of the usefulness of cultural expertise, whilst the UK and Italy position respectively 4th and 6th. Various analytical readings have been developed to explain this ranking, and the one that perhaps attracts me most at this time is the connection with the data on the trust in public institutions and the rule of law. The typology of experts also is interesting. We see that in France it's much less varied than in Italy and the UK. Both in France and in Italy, the knowledge of the language of the litigants is an identifying factor for cultural experts, and sociology as a discipline for the university professors. While in the UK, the most common type of experts are the country experts, identified by geographic area, and anthropology as academic discipline. And this typology of expert is to be connected with the modality of appointment of experts, who in France are mostly in-house experts, which also contributes to explain why judges do not always need to formally appoint an expert in civil or legal system, because they have already the experts, in-house experts. And this also raises an interesting debate on the independence of the expert. We will see that in the common law system, the expert is considered to be more likely independent if does not belong to the legal system, whereas the opposite applies in the civil law legal systems. The most common form of remuneration of experts in France and the UK is the standard hourly rate, while in Italy is meant as other, which means that the experts are often paid by associations that employ them in Italy. To be noted that the UK shows a high percent of experts who are providing their expertise on a voluntary basis. And this connects with three main reasons: the difficulty to secure payment, despite the fact that the legal aid is available in the UK much more than in all other countries of the research; the fact that the experts also hesitate to be identified as such because their main occupation is university professors; and a comparatively high level of social engagement that leads to provide pro bono expertise. The typology of cases show also a compact selection in France, which corresponds also to the type of experts appointed at the specific tribunals. Since they are in-house experts, it is more difficult for judges to appoint out of the house experts. And so the type of cases in which experts are appointed is compact in France. Whereas in Italy, in the UK, the typology of cases is extremely wide, with a greater frequency of cases involving conventional cultural consideration, such as cases involving witchcraft and religion, and an even greater variety of cases in the UK where fields of law such as tax and money laundering are also included. And now this map shows the question that can be asked to the expert. This map is meant to provide an idea of the degree of detail and the extent of the field of cultural expertise. It's not meant to be mandatory at all, but exemplifies the themes and the degree of detail of the question that can be asked to the experts. So we have the questions regarding belonging to a certain social group. In this case, both self-identification and the need for external evidence are usually required. Questions about belonging are relevant for cases of persecution, discrimination, reason of belonging to a certain social group. But in some cases, belonging to a certain social group affects also the nature of the crime, such as organized crime, terrorism, hate speech, and crime against humanity. And of course, additional caution is required in these cases for what concerns the profile of the experts, their capacity to be and stay independent, and the capacity of the courts to correctly use the assessment of evidence by the experts. And then we have the evaluation of risk to others and from others. Risk from environmental hazard are usually relevant in cases of migration, family law, criminal law, but also civil responsibility. There are particular notions of risk that are often undermined, such as the risk on the longer term, when, for example, a minor who has been protected from a dangerous environment becomes a major, and then is said to likely return to that very dangerous environment or a long time after a family dispute, for example. We have also questions about specific legal concepts, which are pivotal. Sometimes, such as the establishment of the civil status of migrants in the absence of documents that provide evidence on their marriage, divorce, and their family composition. The notion of enterprise, which in some legal tradition is closer to family and is regulated by lineage. The modality of certain non-traceable payment, the notion of fraud. And that we have very often question about protection by state and non-state authority, which are usually evaluated in terms of access to justice, access to healthcare, access to education. These cases are assessed on the basis of existing legislation, but must always be complemented by first-hand data on the actual implementation of these laws for the specific group. We have also questioned about internal relocation, which is relevant for individuals at risk who return to their country of origin. And these are usually assessed with the risk to be tracked down and the capacity to access basic services, especially if the affected person needs to keep a low profile. Similar consideration for what concerns the existence and the implementation of certain foreign laws in cases of protection of social minorities or certain categories such as witnesses, children, women, or laws that discriminate minorities, laws that are against human rights, laws that ensure fair trial. And in our training modules, the Caltex training modules, we explain to the legal professionals and to the experts how to ask these questions and how to respond, as to provide the information that the court need to assess evidence. And I will conclude this presentation with a few words about the impact of cultural expertise on justice and society. Our qualitative data indicates that cultural expertise has the potential to enhance trust in law courts and expedite the legal process, resulting in potential cost savings for taxpayers, and addressing the judicial backlog without compromising legal guarantees. On a larger scale, cultural expertise has the potential to promote social inclusion and social responsibility. And the sources of this presentation are available in open access on the Teaching and Learning page of Cultural Expertise website, which include also a mentorship guide for mentors and mentee made by Anna Ziliotto, the list of cultural expertise training that we provide, the guideline for adopting a higher education program of cultural expertise, with also the report on the adoption of the first diploma on cultural expertise, which is now offered by the University of Paris-Nanterre. Almost the totality, if not all, publication of cultural expertise are published in open access, and they are also available at this page, including books, chapters, and articles. We have a specific session on policy guidelines, and I signal in particular the guide for adopting cultural expertise in one-page format and full-length format in several languages, and the guide for inclusive language. We also have the honor to have a dedicated collection on cultural expertise in HAL, HAL, one of the largest international open access academic repository. And this is my very last slide, the list of social media and working platform, which will progressively be reconfigured as K-Peritia in accordance with the rules of our founders. Please follow us and contribute on this channel, get in touch, and thank you very much for your participation today.